There's more to choosing a hand range than just being given a hands chart and told, here you go, perfect ranges for you. Now go get 'em, Tiger. I wish it were that easy, but it isn't. The optimal starting poker hands will vary wildly based on both where you are playing and what players are currently seated at your table. The good news is this doesn't have to be as complicated as you might think. In this video, I'll give you an easy step-by-step process to follow on how to establish the perfect starting hand ranges to use in the games you play. This will work whether you play in cash games, tournaments, sit and goes, whatever. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not going to help you build your own ranges in this video. Instead, I'm going to give you the tools to figure out how to build your own perfect ranges based on your unique situation. I firmly believe in the old adage, give a man a range and he can win for a day. Show him how to build ranges and he can win for a lifetime. So let's get started. A vacuum range means the hand ranges you use when you have no information on your opponents. The optimal vacuum ranges can vary from poker room to poker room, stake to stake, and even day to day. Think about the typical dynamic of the games that you play in. Try to think of the hand ranges that will fit the most situations most accurately over the long term. I'll give you a tip to help you get started. Since you typically want to play the opposite of what the opposition is doing, build your hand ranges accordingly. If you play in an overly loose game, you may want to choose tight vacuum ranges across the board. On the other hand, if you play in tight games where your average player is a big nit, you may want to choose vacuum ranges on the looser side. Don't get too extreme with this because even if your game is typically really loose or really tight, you need to leave room to adjust to the extremes that might still be present during any given session. So for example, if you built for a loose environment and you overdid it and a maniac sits down at your table, you're not going to have any room to adjust any further to that maniac, right? Remember, the goal is to match your ranges to the average players, not the most extreme. By the way, if you want help choosing some vacuum ranges, I provide information on pre-flop ranges on my site. I'll put a link above and in the description below. Now, the reason you don't want to go too extreme in your vacuum ranges leads me to our next step. Many players still follow static ranges. In other words, they raise the same exact hands every single time they play from every single position. This simply won't work if you want to maximize your chance of winning at the tables. You need to be able to adjust based on the table dynamic. This is because opening too wide in an overly loose dynamic can bleed your bankroll dry in a hurry, and opening too tightly in a really tight dynamic can cause you to miss out on a lot of free, dead money. A good way to do this is to take a look at your vacuum range and then think about what the best adjustment would be. Were you to face opponents with extreme tendencies seated to your left, because when you are open raising, the players to your right don't really matter since they have already folded. What you need to focus on is the 2 or 3 seats directly to your left. Let's take a look at an example. Now let's say you open a 35% range approximately on the button. It might look something like this. This might be the hand range you choose to open, right? Now, if you're playing in an overly loose game on average, this might be a little bit tighter. If you're playing in an overly tight game, this might be a little bit looser. But let's just go with this for now. Let's say this is the hand range you chose, and this is a pretty common hand range that people will open on the button. Now let's take a look at how we might build our adjustment ranges based off what our starting point is. So we're starting right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build 3 ranges like this in PokerStove just to show you how you might do this. So let's say we want to build our tighter range. So at this starting point, let's say, okay, we're on a dynamic where we need to play a little bit tighter. We have really loose players to our left or aggressive players, so we can avoid getting exploited or putting ourselves in more complicated spots than we have to. So what we might first do is take off maybe some of the weaker hands out of our range. Let's just take the bottom part off right here. Maybe we'll take some of the weaker aces off. And maybe we won't even open some of these weak pairs. And maybe we'll take a couple of the suited connectors off. So it might look something like this. So instead of opening your 35% range in a really loose dynamic on the button, you might tighten up in a really bad spot to something like 23%, like we're showing right here. On the other hand, let's say there's really tight players behind you and you want to loosen up your range. So we can just do exactly the opposite. We'll start with our 35% and maybe we'll add on some more suited connectors, suited semi-connectors. Maybe we'll add on a few unsuited hands and maybe we'll raise all of our suited kings and queens. And maybe our range would look something like this. So maybe in a really tight dynamic, we might open 46% on the button, or even looser than this, just depending on what the extremes are, right? But this is just to give us a good starting point. So approximately what I'm doing here is, if I'm starting at 35%, I'm probably going to be opening between 45 and 50% if I get the correct dynamic that's tight, right? And on the other hand, if I happen to be in a loose dynamic where I have aggressive players behind me and I want to tighten up, I'll tighten up to somewhere between 10 and 15%, right? So I'll go from 35 down to 25 to 20%, something like that. Anything in that range is normally typical and probably going to be optimal for the games you're playing in. Of course, remember, there's kind of a sliding scale here. So if you're playing in a slightly loose dynamic, you might open 30% instead of 35%. If you're playing in a slightly tight dynamic, you might open 40% instead of 35%. But just having this three-tree system is a really good starting point and will get you off on the right foot. Go ahead and just use this to get kind of your feet wet doing it. Pick 3 separate ranges for every position that you're going to open. So I've done the button range here. Maybe we can also do the cutoff range. And maybe our starting cutoff range would be 30%. Maybe we'll open 20% in a loose environment and we'll open, 40% in a tight environment, whatever. Do a reality check on your ranges. Some hands you don't want to shed from your range just because they have a lot of value in loose environments. And some hands you don't want to get rid of in tight environments for the same reason, right? Just because they have maybe high implied odds or something like that. So now that you know how to build your ranges, let's take a look at how to use them at the tables. Learning to read a table dynamic is an important skill to master. Poker is a game of choosing the correct frequencies, and being attuned to what is happening around you will put you in more profitable situations more often while avoiding unclear or downright minus EV spots as well. The best way to establish a table dynamic is to profile your opponents. It could be as simple as just assigning a note or a simple color code to everyone you have a read on, whether it be through observation or through HUD stats. You can get much more elaborate with your labeling, but even a simple system can make a world of difference to your bottom line if you're not adjusting like this already. You can choose any colors you want, but I like to label tight players blue, loose players red, and those in the middle yellow. You can get a lot more nuanced if you want. For example, you could have light blue, blue, dark blue to sort out the varying degrees of tightness. You could have orange, red, or dark red to use for loose environments, right? On a side note, I always label fish green, so people with high VPIPs, I just give them their own separate categories since even though they're loose, they're also incompetent players, so you don't necessarily want to tighten up when you have fish around you. As we go forward here, you will see why labeling fish separately is helpful. Once you establish labels, adjusting your ranges becomes really easy. Let's go through a few potential table dynamics to see how this works. Here's a chart that illustrates several potential table configurations. Each of these tables can be attacked in a different way, and it all starts with choosing the correct preflop frequency. So what I've done here is I've taken 9 different possible configurations of tables, and I've placed players around the table based on their tendencies. So we have, of course, the normal players are yellow, tight players are blue, and the loose players are red. And I also included fish on here, which will be labeled green. So the hero is going to be the black spot here, always. So what we're really worried about is the 2 players behind us, right? So let's look at number 1 right here. So we have 2 normal players, so that means we don't need to adjust our range at all. We just keep our normal standard vacuum range. If we took that button example we had a minute ago, this would be our 35% range here if these were our 2 blinds. So let's look at the next example, number 2. We have a blue player and a yellow player, so we have a slightly tighter environment than normal. So we want to loosen up accordingly. So it's perfectly fine just to go ahead and go with that looser range. So number 3 is a similar situation, except we now have the blue player in more of a big blind situation. So, that's a slightly better situation for us if we happen to be on the button right here. So we probably would want to go ahead and open our 45% range right here. So on number 4, we have 2 fish behind us. Now we know we generally want to tighten up when we have loose players to our left, but remember, fish are completely different. Since they're so bad post-flop, we want to play more hands with them. So with 2 fish to our left, we either need to loosen our range, or in this case, with 2 fish, since we know we're likely to get action because we have 2 players, maybe we want to keep our hand range a little bit tight. So maybe we just go with our normal range right here. Now with number 5 right here, we have a loose competent player and a loose fish. So what do we do here? With the loose player being in the blind, the competent player, we probably want to tighten up in that situation, right? But with the fish in the small blind, maybe it slightly cancels that out. So we definitely probably, based on the loose player in the big blind behind us here, we probably would want to go ahead and tighten up slightly, and then maybe loosen slightly back up because of the fish. So maybe we open our normal range in this case, right? However, like I said, it's perfectly fine just to go ahead and tighten up to your tightest range here as well. So on number 6, we have 2 loose competent players to our left, so we definitely want to tighten up in this spot. So if we were starting at 35, we'd probably want to be in that 20 to 25% range. So here we have 2 tight players to our left, so we definitely want to loosen up here. So we'd want to be at least, if we're starting at 35, we want to be at least 45, but probably more like 50% or higher in this exact situation. So the next 2 are basically the same for all intents and purposes. Based for us, I mean, the players to our right are different, but for the purposes of this example, we're really just concerned with the people to our left. So we have a loose fish, and we also have a tight player. So this is probably the situation where you want to loosen up the most, right? So if we were starting at 35, we want to be at least at our 45% standard loosening range. So that's it. Now you know how to confidently choose starting hand ranges as well as how to adjust them based on what your opponents are doing. Now go out there and get busy winning, and thanks for watching.